Hello again, Wishmakers. It is myself, Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Today we'll be talking about slings, the ancient weapon that is the most portable weapon in the world, pretty much like a few things I mentioned in my last video. Now, please bear in mind that although of course I've been practicing and trying to get the technique correct, the clips that you're seeing are from literally about the second or third time I was ever able to get a few hours to properly practice with the sling, so please excuse the fact that you'll be seeing me experimenting a lot and doing most likely some really terrible techniques at times, which even I'm able to see now having a bit more practice, but at least it gives you an idea of the dynamics of the weapon and what you can expect in terms of ammunition sizes you can use in it and such like. The first point I'd like to make about them is that they are extremely portable, as in to the point where you can forget that you even have them on. With weapons like bows, crossbows, javelins, even throwing knives and axes, you name it, a lot of them require space, extra storage, specializations like, certain maintenance equipment. Bows will need different strings, you'll need to have sometimes things like special socks and bags to store them to make sure they don't get wet and all kinds of things. Whereas with a sling, you can, as I say, pop them in your pocket, or you can wear them on something as strapping, around something like an arm, or even have it around your head. Or I've seen people, and I've tried myself and it works, you can just wear it around your waist like a belt. Simple as that. And then deploy them when ready. Which of course is extremely useful when you've got loadouts to consider. Just like with modern soldiers, you have to consider the storage and bulk of what you're carrying around. And if you're already a man-at-arms or a knight or someone, and you've got spears, swords, shields, extra equipment including your armour, which of course will be designed to be fairly ergonomic and comfortable anyway, but when you start packing on the pounds with hundreds of extra different items, you're not really going to have much space to add an extra large item like a bow or crossbow or an arquebus on top of all of that. So hence something like a sling basically offsets that penalty with the fact that it's really easy to carry around. Of course, they're notably famously used by certain ancient peoples like the Balearic slingers, and indeed it's one of those weapons that's actually a lot harder to learn than other weapons, which is a disadvantage and perhaps why it has become a bit of an underdog in history in terms of mentions. It's something that, unlike bows, which are moderately easy to learn, where you can get used to the knock, draw, loose and getting the anchor point and those things, or like guns such as hand cannon and arquebuses, you can just sort of learn how to use them in terms of functionally, just how to load, how to aim, shoot, and that sort of thing, and do so reasonably. You'll become fairly competent as you can be with them, even though always professional people with years of training will always be superior. It's just with slings, they are especially hard to learn, I find. Even now, with weeks of training to the point where I've worn the skin away on my fingers and created sore spots from constantly practicing day after day, I still don't really consider myself to be competent with it. And, it's going to take a while before I can shoot accurately with it, unlike with something like a crossbow, which I could pick up fairly easily. Although, of course, you can use, just general stones on the ground. You'll see in the video clips that I've got in there, I experiment with various sizes, from tiny little rocks that buzz at a high pitch in the air, right down to rocks I can barely release from the sling itself. But apart from that, there's also stuff like baked clay and lead shot, which generally weren't actually, some of them were more of a rounded type of shape, which of course is very aerodynamic, flies really far and true, but you also see some examples that were a sort of lobed shape, and it's also noteworthy that especially the lead ones would normally, from the predictions that have been made from archaeological finds, would probably actually have sharpened tips. So you imagine the lobed ones the shape of something like a rugby ball or something like that, but with actual sharp points, so that when of course they actually hit, rather than just being the impact from the stone or the actual shot, you've got proper puncturing force, same as other projectiles like arrows, bolts and javelins. So then of course that force can then be on a smaller surface area and can start looking at piercing things like maybe padded armour, or if it's slightly deflected by the edge of something like a helmet or something, which of course means that you can do greater damage to any armour or human flesh. And also, actually, because you've got that weight concentrated into the surface area, you can get a lot more range out of them, to the point where there are literally documented examples where slings have outranged bows, which is pretty impressive when you're talking about the high grade ones. Now, one thing that certainly fascinates me, but doesn't at all surprise me to be honest, is that after a quick bit of research I have found actual artwork which depicts in the medieval period, long after what would be the supposed heyday of slings, actually showing the active usage in both battles and in sieges, which depict both staff slingers, which were sort of a bit similar to, well, more similar to trebuchets. We had the actual, well, a larger sling as a sort of pouch on the end of, guess what, a staff, which from what I've seen seems to be better for not so great a range, but for heavier projectiles, so you can have more impact and start slinging hefty rocks at people. And of course the actual hand slings, which are good for general sort of slinging about at, well, a greater distance with smaller projectiles, but putting a lot of force into it so they actually do become properly deadly, as opposed to just throwing them. And as I say, there are multiple depictions. I'm going to link all the ones I've found so far in the description of the video. But yeah, it's certainly interesting, because although obviously we can't take every single detail literally, like, you've got people, for example, who sometimes are even bigger than the buildings they're defending, and people who just look sort of disproportionate, like their head's bigger than their body, or weird details like that, and bows and the sort of things like that drawn really awkwardly where it can't be real. It's the general things, like of course depictions of the castles and people using bows, and in this case people using hand slings and staff slings, should still be taken seriously as something that was actually done back in those time periods, even, as I say, after ancient times. Although of course I've shown how I actually really do like slings, and I think they, well, don't get as much attention as they deserve, seriously, I have to admit I still do prefer bows, simply because of the power and puncturing they can do, as well as the fact that you can get various ammunition types, such as fire arrows to conflagrate, various buildings that are thatched while raiding, or just as a scare tactic. And on a similar note, you can intimidate with things like whistling arrows that make horrendous noises as they fly through the air. You can get different arrowheads to do more sort of, well, like broadheads to do more flesh wounds to actually kill someone easier who is unarmoured, and things like bodkin shot, which are good for puncturing light to medium grades of armour, but aren't as great at tearing the flesh apart, as well as other things as well, like fishing arrows I've encountered before and such things, as well as fletchings and stuff that affect accuracy and range. So again, I very much like slings, but bows are always considered superior, but there you go. Anyway, that's me done for today, so hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to tell me in the comments, do you want to hear more about slings, or do you want to hear about other projectile weapons, or something else entirely? Also, just before I go, one final mention, someone asked me ages ago how old I am in the 300 questions thing, and I've forgotten to answer it all this time. I am 23, and in October I shall be 24. There's your answer. And watch this little extra clip to show when a farmer found me while I was slinging. Alright, I don't know if you can see all of that, but done quite a bit of injury to my fingers. It's literally becoming painful to actually, well, shoot anymore. There's that bit, and then there's that bit that's been peeled away, and a bit here from earlier. Just generally becoming difficult to shoot again.